Show your T-BAL team spirit and buy your hard-working Art Lab team a cup of coffee, which helps fuel purchases of high-octane equipment and T-BAL tech that get poured back into percolating, highly caffeinated content for you. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search Therapy Bites.
On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey T-Ballers, are you winning at work but losing at life? Today's guest, Dan Howington, is a life realignment specialist, and he's here to reignite your passion for something bigger than self alone on an episode we call Something Bigger Than Self, the Psychology of Service, coming up next on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker, our special guest's psychosilly-analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnach.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the TBAL team.
Hey T-Ballers, welcome to the episode today, Something Bigger Than Self, Psychology of Service. And today we're going to talk about, are you unhappy, dissatisfied? Whose life are you living anyway? How to realign, refocus, and reframe the way you win. Why is change so hard? And what's the big secret to less stress and more happiness? And we're going to wrap it up by talking about the scientific case for happiness. There's lots and lots of research out about that, and I'm going to bring you a smidgen of that today, and about how service is the secret ingredient. After 35 years as a professional consultant, seller, and sales leader, Dan, our guest today, has come to believe that we're the happiest when we serve, when we help others see their intrinsic value and live with passion, that we're most fulfilled when we remind others of their significance and importance. Dan has studied positive psychology, human needs psychology, and neuro-linguistic programming, which you guys may know as NLP, some of my favorite things in the world. And he's trained in Tony Robbins' strategic interventionist life coaching curriculum that he developed with a partner, Chloe Medanis, a leader in human needs psychology. Dan started his practice in 2019, focused on helping others clarify their highest intent, refocus, realign their passion, and rediscover their joy.
Stay in the stands at the end of the interview, T-Ballers, and witness our special guest slug a bite-sized brain ball with your name all over it, clean out of the art lab.
Dan, man, we're just glad to have you here today. You and I talked about this last year, and gosh, we've had technical difficulties with our technomolology, and we're just glad to have you on the show. How's 2023 starting out for you?
Well, it's such a pleasure, Heath. It's great to meet you finally. I know we've talked back and forth, and you're right. Took us a couple of tries to finally hook up. 2023, I'm always an optimist, right? So I'm always positive. I think it's going to be a great year. I've been sort of dodging these little viruses for the past 2, 3, 4 years, and one finally got me for a 24-hour kind of spell there at the beginning of the year. So I'm taking that as a good omen. That's my one little bump in the road that I'll have in 2023. So I think it's going to be a great year.
Well, man, I'm right there with you because I have been dodging my own little flus and viruses, and you know, you guys that listen, you know I'm a freaking health nut. But I was telling Dan in the pre-show that I went to my brother's for Thanksgiving and picked something up. But you know, speaking of being optimistic, the way I looked at that is that gave my immune system some good practice with heavy lifting, and I think my immune system is stronger for it. But today we're going to talk about something bigger than self, because I see all over social media, me first and me too, and enough about you, let's talk about me. And I think it's all getting to be a little bit too much. And I found in my private practice that focusing on self is often one of the most sabotaging things that you can do in a relationship. And we'll get to that. But first of all, what really drew you to this field in the first place?
It's interesting you say that. There's a couple of things. As a young man in my 20s, I was consumed with really significance. One of the things I've learned as I've gone through training and that sort of thing and building my practice is, significance is one of those values that we pursue. And the whole human needs psychology area that Chloe Madonis is a specialist in, right, is one of the leaders in. She says everything we do is really to meet a human need. And when we understand those needs, that helps us understand the behaviors that we're exhibiting. And so when we get to that root cause, we're able to change it. For me, I was constantly angry and frustrated. And I always felt like I was in a situation I couldn't really express my true talent. I couldn't really pursue my best self. And I had to slow down and take a look at what I was doing and why. What was I trying? What was the outcome that I really wanted, And a variety of things happened that made me do that. But discovering Tony Robbins and his teachings really helped me to understand the power I had to control my own reality, really, and to form, my best life. And I had to, as I went about doing that, I really had to dig in and do a lot of research. I'm a complicated person. I have a lot of thoughts and behaviors, and most of us are, I think. And trying to dig into that, trying to sort of self-assess, and what I'm doing, is that serving the outcome that I want? Am I becoming the best that I can be as a father, as a son, as a husband, as a colleague, as whatever my role is at work, all of these hats that we wear. And if that's not leading me towards my highest intent or my divine ideal, I like to say as well, then why am I doing it? What need am I meeting by acting in this way, by responding in this way, right? And so that's really what brought me to the point where I began working with other people to understand those things. I wish when I was 28 or 29 that I had someone that could have taken me put a hand on my shoulder and said, let's talk about a few things here, Dan. I think you're a wonderful, talented guy, but I see you behaving in ways that work against you, that work against yourself, that are negative, that are self-defeating. So let's talk about what's going on. Where are you looking outside of yourself to try to solve these feelings that you're having? Let's talk about it, because I really think you've got a great, bright future. But in order for you to realize, your best, you're gonna have to change some of the ways that you behave. And so that, for me, I had to make that decision. And certainly, I'm always a work in progress, Dr. Heath. You never reach your optimum, right? So, but I've gotten a lot better, and by better, I mean happier and more content with who I am, and feeling that I'm making decisions that are in my best interest. And put me, it's interesting, you were talking about early, sometimes when we focus on self, I think it's the self-promotion aspect of it. But I think when you are your best self, that's when you're best able to help others, right? When you're on a solid foundation yourself, then you can help others. When you're securely tied off, then you can help pull somebody else up. But if you're barefoot on gravel and you're trying to help pull somebody else up, that's dangerous for two of you, right?
Oh, it is. And I like to tell people that it's never a good idea for one drowning person to try to rescue another drowning person. And in my field, it really kind of amazes me. And this is not meant to be judgmental of clinicians that may be listening to this, but it is meant to be informative. And as my dad used to say, you can take it for what it's worth. But it's always surprised me that in mental health, as well as on social media with influencers, the people who are less able to manage their own lives spend such a great amount of time trying to manage the lives of others. Absolutely. And that these so-called experts and influencers, if you were able to be a fly on the wall, you would never want to live the way that they live. And when you're picking out a clinician, what I would ask you is the clinician that you're going to choose to work with, what do you see when you look at their life? Does it seem to be a well-managed life? Do they seem to have all their proverbial ducks in the row? Are you going to somebody for marriage counseling? And How are they good at marriage counseling because this is their 13th marriage? Well, I might look somewhere else. And I think that Dan makes a good point that if you're the best way to help somebody else is to get your own affairs in order. Dan, I have a question since we're two guys sitting here talking and you're a former young man and I'm a former young man. We know something about being young men collectively. Do you find that that's a big problem with young men in our country, maybe in the world, but especially in our country, having the mindset you had and really needing somebody to reach out and guide them in the proper way, and they just don't have it?
Well, I do. I mean, I think, a lot of what we aspire to or what we try to do is driven by what we know, right? And how do we learn what we know? What we know is what we observe, especially as we're younger, And there's something too about young men as they go out to create their own path. They look to better themselves. They look to move beyond what they see in their father, And that comes with a naivete about what it takes to be a father, what it takes to be a man that has, a family and a wife and holds down a steady job. So there's an amount of ignorance that we go into the world with as young men, I think. And if depending upon your personality and who you are, you may go about it different ways. For me, I felt like just the intensity of my desire would get me where I wanted to be. If I just ran at it hard enough, and if I just tried, hard enough, I could make it happen. I could force my will upon others in the world, and so I think in our society we tend to glamorize the material possessions, right? What we tend to do, I think, is to say, when you have this thing, then you'll belong. When you have these things, then you'll be accepted. And I'm sure, there's such a drive we have to be accepted, to be a part of a group, to have people say you're one of us. It's a huge drive. And so as young men, as we're trying to be successful, that's what we want to do. We want to be successful. We want to be significant because we have financial strength, or we have at least credit strength. We can go out and buy this and buy that and do this and do that. It's such an external search for meaning that once we get to a point where we've done that, we've bought that, we have that, you wake up and say, why do I still have this gaping hole in my heart? My soul feels deflated because I've spent it in pursuit of these meaningless things.
Yeah.
And so the sooner we get to that point in our life, there are those who don't ever go there, right? They struggle with other things. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of men that strive, we get to that point where we've exhausted our energy, and we feel like we've really not made any progress towards a better life, a greater life, a higher purpose, right? And that's what happened with me. It was like, you dream of the materialistic things. You aspire to those things. And you don't really understand the psychology of happiness, of success, right? And so, I don't know. I see a lot of young men that are in that boat and that are doing that. And I think we're influenced. I think social media can be absolutely poisonous if you don't have your own idea of who you are and what matters to you and the outcome that you want, right? I think it can be very destructive.
Well, I think it's, speaking of social media, I think it is level of exposure, because if you think about social media and what it preaches about success, you're going to see Lamborghinis and Ferraris and mansions, and you're going to see, for young men, some supermodel hanging off of every arm. And what you're not going to see as success as, hey, here's me pouring myself into a job and finding meaning in the job, of serving an elderly person. Hey, here's a picture of me rescuing a stray animal. Now you're going to see some of that, but I'm a researcher. I love digging into learning new things. I think this would be a great research project, and the numbers wouldn't be that hard. You could take a sample, say 1,000 social media posts on success, and you may find single-digit percentages of success being equated with service to others.
Exactly.
What you really get, and for those of you who, and I'll move this around, this is our fairy tailing Nat here. It's right over Dan's face right now, but I'm going to move him to the center. But it's fairy tailing because we look at somebody and we think that having a fancy sports car means A, B, or C. Right. And it's just fairy tailing. I'm an older guy now, but I am in my prime. My wife says, "Wow, you're getting old," and I say, "Hey, I'm in my prime." I stole that from Doc Holliday from the movie Tombstone. It's my favorite quote. Hey, I'm in my prime. An old song back during my day in the 70s that actually came out on an 8-track tape. You kiddos Google 8-track tape. I would challenge you to tell me if you've ever heard of that if you're under the age of 25. But an 8-track tape, Charlie Rich, an old country singer, sang, "No one knows what goes on behind closed doors." Now, exactly. He had a different purpose for the song, but my point is a fairy tailing point that you think you know what's going on in the life of that person with the Lamborghini and the supermodels and the, the black Amex credit card, but you don't. I've had people come to me for therapy, and they've actually named names and said, "Oh my goodness, if my life were only like so-and-so." When I do therapy, it's confidential. I can't name names unless somebody gives me written permission to do so. And we have some fresh from the therapy couch stories from patients who have signed releases that we can share their story because they want to help others. But I've had people say, if my life were only like so-and-so, and I thought, wow.
No.
And I've said to myself, I didn't say this out loud, but I've said to myself, gosh, so-and-so was here yesterday and their life sucks.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't say that out loud. So that's what we call fairy tailing. And people just go through life with this fairy tale that if I have this possession, and one thing I heard an old preacher say one time, you'll never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer.
That's exactly right. That's great. That's great. No, I think your points are all well made. I mean, I spent 30 some odd years in technology sales. And so we have a lot of different jokes we talk about in terms of demos, right? But when you give a demo, what you're doing is you're every potential aspect of that situation is perfection, as close as you can get it. Right?
Oh, wow.
So, your system is optimized to run your software. Your software has already been tuned. You may have customized a few things for the customer. It's so when the customer sees you go through a demo, they're seeing the optimized system that fits their needs that they really would love to own. And I'm not saying that's a bad practice, but when you see somebody on social media, most people on social media, what you're seeing is every aspect of what they're showing you has been optimized. That's a moment in time that they've choreographed to present themselves in the best possible light. A lot of what we see, is fantasy, just like you said. And it's, the thing though is we can't control them doing that. And we can't really understand. We don't know the details. There may be 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1 million of those posts that we see may be accurate. They may be true. And they may be happy, fulfilled people that have charities on the side and they help, troubled youth, and they help, animals, and they are a fulfilled person at the peak of their fulfilling their destiny. I don't know that. I can't say that. But I can say that the human condition is full of challenges. The human condition makes us doubt who we are, and makes us worry about if we're good enough. It makes us worry about whether people like us. It makes us doubt ourselves. It makes us feel, and in extreme cases, or in the more extreme cases, people need some help from experts like you, Doc, that can help them overcome depression and help them, pull out of really very bad negative addictions and things like that. So, I think when you look to social media, you look to it as entertainment and entertainment only. Aspiring to be like someone else, I tell my clients, don't find someone who you think is perfect. Find someone that is resilient and that is positive and optimistic in the face of challenges. Find someone who has overcome challenges. Find someone, like you mentioned a moment ago about going to see a marriage counselor or someone that may have been married 13 times. Maybe not 13 times. But, if somebody's been through a marriage or two and they're a marriage counselor, I don't know. I might listen to that person. They got a few scars. They got a few, they've got some issues, a few broken bones here and there. So they've been through it, man. So,
I think it depends on what they've done with it.
Right.
I like to say never waste a hurt. And I think the most successful people I've found are people that make opportunities out of their lives and out of their maybe wrecked relationships. And it really just depends on what you're doing with it. And never waste a hurt. I popped up on the screen there for those you watching this later on a YouTube video, a little critter we call the mind reading gnat. Now, by the way, gnat stands for negative automatic thought. And I popped it up there because Dan was talking about what other people think. And let me just burst a bubble. I love parapsychology. I studied it in undergrad school. It's one of my favorite courses. Mind reading and psychics and spirits and ghosts, oh my. And I hate to burst balloons, but listen, it doesn't exist. The best way to know what someone is thinking is not think that you know what they're thinking, but to have a conversation and ask them what they're thinking. People often catastrophize what others are thinking about them, and they don't even know what others are thinking about them. And let's just say that they do think something that is unkind about you and they speak it, it's up to you, up to me, to restructure what we're going to think about what they say. And I have a tip, and I stole this from Marcus Aurelius, famous Roman emperor king, who called it air set in motion. I would add a tweak to that. It is sound waves riding on air set in motion. If somebody says to you, you're a disgusting flibberflidget, what's that mean? Well, it means absolutely nothing. That's a made-up word. It also means nothing if they call you a rude name. How can air, and I'm blowing into the air, be a threat to you? Hopefully you can stand in a breeze in windy January weather and not be blown over. How does air from someone's mouth make a difference what you think about yourself unless you decide to let it? So stop mind reading, as I popped up the little mind reading gnat there, and start really getting into what you're going to decide to think about yourself and building up yourself. And that's what we're coming to next here. But I want to ask Dan, what's the main thing do you believe in you're in the self-help field, the life improvement field, the success field. What have you found makes you different than others that practice in the same genre, the same sector? What's different about you?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of people that I think have conversations, in-depth conversations, and try to get to like root causes and things like that. It's my opinion that I want to know kind of where you are. I help people define where they are. And it doesn't matter to me. It's not that important to me what happened in the past. It doesn't matter, what happened. We can theorize what we think is causing things. We can talk a little bit about it, but my main focus is on the next step forward. So what I'm trying to identify is the underlying emotion that's driving the behavior that's negatively affecting your life. And so that's the first thing I do is I have a 5-step process I follow, Doc, and you probably have something similar. I walk people through where are they right now? Where are you right now? And I don't spend a lot of time talking about last weekend, my brother's wife said blah, blah, it made me feel this way. We want to back away from those issues, those those events, okay? We want to talk about how you respond to any event. And I want to understand why an external event makes you respond that way. It doesn't really help us to go back and revisit that much. I just want to understand what's happening that's making you feel the way you feel, and where do we take a step forward? And who are the people in your life that can help and support you? And what is the one small change we can make this week that's going to lead to you feeling better next week? And so I would say, from my perspective, I'm more forward thinking, forward moving, more taking immediate action to create meaningful change. We don't have to fully understand specific instances, right? Sometimes people, and I think you probably have these instances all the time, sometimes people want to overthink and sort of analyze these situations and these things that come up. And you're, like you said, I can't understand what your sister-in-law meant, right? I can't understand what your classmate meant at the reunion when they said whatever so when you get into that minutia, you lose track of how to change it. What is the real thing that we're trying to do? What I'm trying to do is I want you to develop a process that helps you deal with these events as they occur and define the outcome that you want, because that's really what we want to do. So
that's excellent. I love that, and I think that's quite a valuable and interesting journey. I just put up another one of our little Art Lab graphics here, and this is the underthinking ant, and the automatic negative thought. And actually, I'm a big one to challenge the whole thing about overthinking, because, and let me get your take on this. Here's my theory. Here's my hypothesis, that really, you don't really have people that overthink things. Personally, I've never run into patients that thought too much about something, but rather they're underthinking, and this underthinking ant has a telescope, and he's just laser focused on one thing, but he's doing that to the exclusion of all these other things. Think about it, dear listener. If you're hyper focused on the wart on your nose, what are you missing? By the way, I've got a little divot on my nose there. That's why I bring that up. But what's that mean? It means nothing. What can that do to me? It does nothing to me. I know it's not cancer. I've had it checked out. How does it sabotage me? It can't. It really all depends on how I decide to think of it, how I decide to look at it, what I decide to do with it. And what I find, Dan, is that people really, there's another song in the 70s, I'm overlooking a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. You probably remember that. It's one of my favorite songs as a young person. And that's kind of an underthinking thing, is that when you become too focused on some things, what you're really doing is underthinking all the talent that you have, all the opportunity that you have, all the support that you have, all the different mechanisms for success that you have.
That's a great way of thinking about it. I see how you're doing that. I completely agree. It's a different way of looking, I think, at the same issue, but I understand what you're thinking. Yeah, it's hyper focused on the negative, right?
Yeah, well, we're so laser focused on something that we're underthinking everything else. I know people that. Well, I had a buddy of mine. He was in HR. Joe Maniaci. We were colleagues, so I called his name. And Joe, if you're listening, man, I miss you, buddy. Love you. Wish you well. But Joe taught me one of the most valuable things I ever learned. We were going around the country teaching the 7 habits of highly effective people. We got to meet Stephen Covey and be trained by Stephen Covey before he passed away. And that was up in, where was that? I think it was St. Louis somewhere. But Joe was from St. Louis. And Joe said he was changing his life by writing on a card, a recipe card, something along the lines of, you're now at home, your work day is over, it's time to focus on your family and provide them what they need. And he put that on the visor of his vehicle, and Joe said that he would read that to himself 20 times before he got out of his vehicle to walk in his house. And he said it made all the difference. And he would tell me about, during the summer, he would spend time watching Shark Week with his son. And my point there is that it would be so easy to underthink and miss out on all the opportunities with your family because you're over here still stuck in a mindset of difficulties at work. you're underthinking all the benefit of being home with your family. And I find something else that people underthink is their purpose, their capabilities, the meaning of them being in life, and the fact that they are meant to be on this planet, and they begin to doubt their value. How do you address folks that doubt their value?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I may have mentioned in some of the pre-work that we did together about a company I work with, or an institute that I work with. It's called the Values in Action Institute, the VIA Institute. And about, I want to say 20 years ago, probably, they did some groundbreaking work around character strengths. And I use that with every client, regardless of how we start out, right? Whatever their issue is, wherever they're going, because I think what it does, it's based on positive psychology. And what it does is it gives me a sort of a blueprint of where that person is and where their strengths are. And so just like when we talk about human needs that drive behaviors, human strengths augment our best qualities. And so if for example, one of your best qualities is leadership, or justice, I think, is one of the character strengths, which is often a characteristic of leadership. And what it indicates is you're able to look at both sides of a situation and make a fair and balanced decision when needed. There's things like that. There's love, there's acceptance, there's a lot of different strengths. But I do that so I have something positive to refer back to all the time, right? Because often something will come up in conversation and you can say, well, that's a good indicator of one of your strengths. Remember, one of your strengths was love. And so when I hear you talk about this person, I hear that coming out in your emotionally, right? In the words that you use, in the tone of your voice. This is a relationship that's important to you, something that you might want to think about. Take care of that a little bit more. So so I use that sort of as a basis line. I do find, a lot of people are suffering from, it's almost imposter syndrome, but it's not quite that. I think imposter syndrome is more being in a work relationship, or in a work situation where they feel like they're being paid too much and they don't really know what they're doing, which who the hell does, folks? Let's be honest, okay? I used to, growing up, I used to just have a lot of respect for, and I still do, but not for the same reasons. Anybody that was a vice president, I thought, oh my God, And then I met about 20 of them over the course of about a week who had been promoted to vice president at a bank, right? And so I was thinking, okay, well, and then you meet some guys that run businesses and they're presidents and CEOs. And I'm not saying they're not good people, but it's not like there's some gene or there's some sort of like pool of geniuses that just, they get this, they get blessed in life and they're going to be CEOs and presidents. A lot of it is hard work, but at the same time, there are a lot of people trying to figure it out, so they're not any different than you or I. They've just focused on a specific area of expertise, or they've built a business built around their strengths, and they're doing their best. So the title doesn't convey anything over and above who we are. And so back to your original point, I kind of got off on a sidebar there, but I think people, they don't feel they deserve certain things that happen sometimes. And it may be having a really bright child. It may be having a really understanding and loving wife. It may be having friends that are supportive and helpful. It may be there are times you see some people that don't feel they deserve that. And so what happens is they'll end up sabotaging that situation because they don't deserve it. And it's almost like before the other party figures out that I don't deserve this, I'm going to go ahead and throw a roadblock out there and just kind of, get what I deserve, which would be to be rejected or dropped by this individual.
I deserve to be rejected. And I want to put a finer edge for you T-ballers. Some of you already know this since you're listening to the episodes here, but those of you watching on the video see this little guy you become familiar with called IUTY, and that's IUTY. That stands for inaccurate, unrealistic thoughts. Inaccurate, unrealistic thoughts. And the thought that I'm undeserving, or I don't have worth, I'm worthless, I'm shame, there's something wrong with me. That is an inaccurate, unrealistic thought. The other thing on the screen you'll see up there, guys, is a we call it the feelings gnat, or the emotional reasoning gnat, negative automatic thoughts. And you'll notice there's a compass. And on the compass, north is happy and south is sad. And let's see, west is, I can't read it from here, one emotion, and east is another emotion. The point is, there is no emotion that's going to tell you that you're worthless. There's no emotion that's going to tell you, hey, this will be a zinger for some of you. There's no emotion, you young people, there's no emotion that's going to tell you that you're in love. Now, why do I say that? Because if you connect, you can go Google this, guys, Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov's dogs, ring a bell, the dog slobbered. The problem with thinking that there's some emotion that means that you're worthless is, or let's take love, that when you no longer have the emotion, you'll think that you're no longer in love. Well, I can just tell you, my wife and I have been together this summer for 40 years, and we always don't have fuzzy-wuzzy emotions, but we still love each other. Let me be a bit of a shock jock, Doc, and say this for your listeners. If you equate love with an emotion, a fuzzy-wuzzy, every time you have explosive diarrhea, you'll think you're not in love anymore. That's why we don't equate things we can know, cognitions, with an emotion. There's no emotion that tells you when you should go to work. There's no emotion that tells you that when you should pay your taxes, how fast to drive, whether to quit your job, whether to punch somebody in the nose. Here I've got a angry Dr. Heath head here. There's no emotion that tells me when I should engage in a certain behavior. What drives that are thought processes, and I think Dan and I are really saying the same thing with different words, that you need to drill down into what you have decided to tell yourself about yourself. Dan, what are some of the biggest things that you work on with people as far as them telling themselves, nasty things about themselves? Let me stick another question in. Do you find that these bank presidents and big CEOs struggle with self-concept as much as everybody else?
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com.
The Therapy Bites podcast is HIPAA compliant. No identifying patient information will be disclosed by Therapy Bites podcast hosts or Therapy Bites podcast guests without permission from patients or guardians. All personal stories are de-identified in order to comply with HIPAA, the NASW Code of Ethics, and the ethical principles of psychologists and Code of Conduct. Fresh from the therapy couch and from the deep dark recesses, stories may involve exploding preconceived notions and topics uncomfortable to underthinkers and small farm animals. Audience discretion and duct taping your head for safety is advised. Concrete-headed Kool-Aid drinking humans assume all risks associated with any possibility of choking to death on the accurate, realistic thoughts presented in the art lab. This is natural selection, and Therapy Bites podcast management and hosts are not responsible.
Welcome to this episode of Fresh from the Therapy Couch, where we share stories of hurting, helping, and healing, real-life stories from real-life humans, hoping their messes can be a message you'll use to improve your own lives and possibly maneuver around the mistakes they made. This is Doc Heath, and my background is with 38 years of experience in the behavioral health field with a dual doctorate in neuropsychology and forensic psychology, and I practice in a private clinic each and every day of the week. And one of the most sabotaging cognitive distortion folks encounter in my work is the semantic creep of labeling more and more and more and more and more and more and more things as abuse. Listen, it's high time we stop the ever-widening, disempowering catch-all basket of what we call abuse. There's an ever-growing reference to emotional abuse. Now listen, you can't commit assault or battery on another adult with an emotion. Otherwise, doing so would wind you up in jail. Abuse must take the form of behavior, not the internal emotional experience of another person who's interacting with you. You cannot slap someone upside the head with an emotion. or be slapped upside the head with an emotion. Emotions cannot be swung like a baseball bat, causing a concussion. Imagine a death certificate reading cause of death, concussion by blunt force emotion. Let's take a therapy bite out of this gray herring. Yep, a gray, not a red herring. You can look that up on some of our other videos. Emotional abuse is a gray herring. It's a demonization of emotion, causing us to miss the point of what's really going on, and that is the underlying thought process that then leads to both a behavior and an emotion. What people are talking about when they discuss emotional abuse is really behavior. You might say, but Doc Heath, they're yelling. Yeah, that's a behavior. That's not emotion. People can yell and have all kinds of different emotions. A good place to begin in correcting this in your own mind is realizing that you can only see the behavior, not the emotion. Emotions are invisible. If you want to know the emotion someone is experiencing, there's a secret solution for that. Just ask. Now back to the episode.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the TBAL Team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
Welcome to the Therapy Bites Art Lab library, where we have poured over thousands of volumes to bring you the latest CouchCrumbs quote. Oh, would you like a napkin? You're getting crumbs in the book.
That okay. Me eat book.
Oh. And now today's CouchCrumbs quote.
Good evening, Shylock Holmes here with another of Doc Heath's CouchCrumbs quotes. All misery is ultimately rooted in our own perception.
Oh, you got crumbs on the couch. Extra points for you.
Live the art life. Become a TBAL Teammate Inner Circle supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/therapybites.
Here's Heath and the TBAL Team.
Oh, yeah. Often, the sense of responsibility, I think, makes it worse sometimes. When you have multiple people that are depending upon you, then it's almost like, your fear of making a mistake makes things even worse. It sort of magnifies it. The thing is, you learn, these are behaviors that you learn. So some of the best leaders that I know, they feel that emotion, right? Mm-hmm. But they've learned to respond to that in a different way. So they've learned to manage the emotion. So they'll have the thought that I really don't know what I'm doing. All of these people are dependent on me. And it starts to bring fear and anxiety. And so they've learned that they have to say, well, I'm just a human being. I know enough to make a great decision. I'm going to do the best I can. And that's all I can do. So they respond to it differently, the ones that are strong and the ones that do well. It's not they don't have the fear. It's not that they don't have the worry. It's that they've learned that their response is the only thing they can control. There's a thing when you were talking about Stephen Covey, I wanted to mention to you real quick. There's an acronym that I use, and it was used by the Ohio State Buckeyes when they had that run of, 5-6 national championships under Urban Meyer. But they used to wear bands around their wrists that said E plus R equals O. And that's from Stephen Covey. It's the event plus response equals outcome. And of all of those things that happen in the world, the only thing you can control is your response. So often, and we've talked about multiple things. One of the main things people come talk about, and when I work with them, is stress. Stress, anxiety. Trying to control things, and that feeds into the whole happiness conversation too. And when we talk about that, but the biggest cause of stress in our lives for most of us, most people that I speak with, is trying to control those things that you cannot control. You were talking about mind reading. This person thinks I'm an idiot. What can you do about that, right? Your response.
Sometimes my wife actually tells me that. She doesn't just think it; she says it out loud.
Well,
and I have a friend who, and this is a clean show, and this is just a word. If you guys want to mute this part of it, that's fine. But I'm just gonna have to share it. I don't have to share it, but I will anyway.
I appreciate
his wife will call him a asshole, and my friend will sing "Asshole Mio." Now, see, that's a big difference in a guy that catastrophizes it and thinks, oh, since she called me a name, she doesn't love me and she wants to divorce me and she's probably having an affair and she's already had a divorce attorney. No, my friend just sings a tune to her. It doesn't help. I'm not recommending it. It doesn't help. But it is a different way of thinking about it.
But it helps him.
Yeah, it helps him. It helps him. It really just depends on how you decide to think about it. But I want to get back to the thing about CEOs, and I know you don't know some of these people. Probably I don't know them either. But would you also believe that people like Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all those guys struggle with these distorted thoughts about themselves like everybody else, or do you think they're just immune?
Well, no, I don't think anybody's immune. I think the longer that you've been in a situation of leadership or in a role of leadership, and the longer that you've been successful, you've created some discipline, you've created some associations. I hate to call it coping mechanisms. I'd like to be more positive and say that it's rituals and habits that you've developed to deal with these feelings of uncertainty or doubt or uncertain issues that come up that you got to make decisions on, right? Because there's no manual. It's really, and you know this, but for my benefit, I remind myself there's 8 billion people on this planet. At least that's what they say. There's probably more than that, but that's what we estimate.
That's a lot of freaking people.
That's a lot of people, and there's 8 billion ways to deal with certain situations. Maybe 7.9 billion of those are okay with whoever's dealing with the situation, right? So it's such a unique thing. Each individual handles it somewhat differently. I know that there's uncertainty, and I know that there's fear and doubt. We all deal with that, and it's continuous. We'll never reach a point in life, in my opinion, where we're absolutely certain on everything we do. There's always going to be things that happen that we're uncertain. All we can do is gather ourselves, right? And make sure we've got our feet firmly planted and we're making a decision that's sound. We're not making an emotional decision because often those can be sabotaging to us. But we try to use our experience. We try to use our awesome brain that we have, and we try to act in a way that we think leads to the best outcome. And I truly believe most people are trying to do that, although it seems daily I see people act against that. But that's my theory. I'm going to stick to that. So I think they have the emotion, they have the doubt, but I think they've developed ways to cope and make good decisions.
And the reason I want to point that out is I know we have listeners that are going to hear this and say, well, that's fine for them, but that's not me. They're capable and I'm not capable. And the point I want to get across is a human is a human is a human. Everybody you meet is a human. They're not superhuman. I love Avengers movies and Marvel and DC, but everyone is a human. If you're looking again at this on video, you see this little finger puppet. That's Soren Kierkegaard. He had placed on his tombstone, not the pizza, by the way, but on his real granite tombstone. I'm assuming it's made out of granite, not out of cheese and pizza dough. But on his tombstone, the individual, because the point he tried to make is that the pinnacle of all we could ever be is another human. That's the biggest thing we could ever be. And that's if your name is Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, just a human with all exactly the same thought processes. When Einstein's brain was carved out of his head, after he died, it'd be rude to do it before that, but after he died, guess what they found was the difference? Same weight, same size, same major cortical structures. They found one difference. It was the same color, by the way, too. Same, underneath, we're not black, white, or whatever color. We're all just gray. Our brains kind of have a gray hue to them. They're really mushy. I've cut a few apart. But everything was the same except one thing, and that was connective tissue. The thing that differentiated Einstein was he spent so much time thinking about his thinking and challenging his thinking that there was hyper connectivity. That's what made Einstein Einstein. If you want to be different, think about your thinking in new and different ways. And that's some of what Dan does for a living, I would guess, is helping people think in different ways that they've never thought before.
Oh, that's exactly right. Yeah. So you have to get creative, and you have to have people do things sometimes that are outside of their comfort zone. And but I don't mean anything weird or strange, but if you have somebody that has a negative thought process, we want to give it a name. I love what you were saying about a solo mio. That's a perfect example, right? So every time if this happens, a friend of yours does something and it makes you mad, when that happens, I want you to sing this phrase. I want you to associate this negative event with singing this phrase. I want you to give this negative event a name. Let's name it, because that robs it of power. And then I want you to mentally decide that you're going to address this negative stimulus in a new and different way. So we'll figure out, it may not be singing something. It may be dancing a step, it might be doing some sort of a, patty cake routine. It's something that forms an association in your brain that's more positive, that's more fun, that's more upbeat, and it may be more appropriate. We don't know.
Now, that sounds a little bit like NLP.
Well, very much so, right? I mean, what we're trying to do is we can't avoid the event. And so what we're trying to do is control how we respond. And so the more that we can ritualize it. And I hate to say ritual, makes it sound like it's witchcraft or something, but it's not. It's the same as a habit, right? It's a discipline.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is,
not all habits are bad. Also, we all have habits; they're not all bad.
Right. Well, we want to form new habits, right?
Yeah.
The whole key, but one of the foundations of it is replacing something negative and bad with something good and positive. And it's not that hard, but you do have to have discipline. The good thing about discipline and the good thing about self-discipline is the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And so that's when people say, "I can't," you cannot use can't. You're choosing not to. You're making a decision. And that's,
my fellow colleague, Sarah, who usually sits right there, I'm pointing where she usually sits. I don't know if she stole this or came up with it. As they say, originality is the art of concealing your sources.
That's right.
But Sarah would tell her own patients, all you got to do is remove an apostrophe and a T.
Okay.
And you get can. All you got to do to change can't into can is remove the apostrophe T, and you've got a can there. But it really is very much an association, because neurologically, the more you have your brain do a thing, and guys, I mean anything,
right?
Your brain's going to program up to do more of it. Now, that's even if it's a healthy thing that serves you, or as Dan pointed out, unhealthy things that serve you. Your brain doesn't care. Your brain will equally be willing to do healthy things or unhealthy things based on how you decide to program it. And by the way, the L in the NLP is, of course, linguistic. Words have power. Words have power. I had a rap star get in a bit of a debate with me on social media. I have a social media debate thing. I don't know if it's going to be in this episode or not, but we do drops to kind of break up the episode, and I call it Social Media Smackdown. So I get on there and stir up trouble on purpose. And she said, it's just a figure of speech. Now, that's so interesting because it's coming from a rap artist.
Of course.
It's not a figure of speech. It's a linguistic, and linguistics have power. Try looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, you stinking doo-doo head, every day for the next 6 months. Do you think that won't have an impact on you? It most certainly will have an impact on you. You're better doing the Billy Crystal thing, who from Saturday Night Live would look in the mirror and say, You look marvelous.
That's
now,
exactly right.
That's two opposite things there. Two opposite things. Well, before we run out of time, we got to get on this happiness thing. The scientific case for happiness, and most people think that happiness is just stumbled upon. You know,
Right.
you fall into it, fall out of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the way I work with clients, it's the same thing you're talking about. They say, I'm just not happy. And so I have to say, well, let's talk about that. What does happiness mean to you? What does that mean for you? And well, it means being successful. I'm like, so you're saying that once you're successful, then you'll be happy? Or do you need to be happy in order to be successful? And my opinion is definitely that you should be happy first. And when you're happy, then you'll be successful. And how do you define success? So those are a lot of the conversations I've been having recently around those two things. What do you define as success? What do you find when you say, like, I remember I have twin boys now. They're old, not old. They're 35.
I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that.
I'm about your older. You know what I mean? I'm about your age. I'm sure. You talk about the 70s. That's when I grew up too. I graduated from high school in '79. So that was my era. And it just a real quick aside, when you were talking about 8-tracks, I was a Columbia Record Club 8-track guy when I was 14.
Oh, I remember Columbia Record Club. I'd forgotten about that.
Oh, sure. So this will date me pretty good.
Yeah, me too. I was a member of Columbia also.
So I got my 14, 8 tracks for a penny. And one of the first ones I got was Kiss Destroyer.
Oh, my.
And I remember thinking, man, who are these clowns, And then
That's funny.
And then you put it in, and it's like, well, it was pretty good. So ended up being a big Kiss fan, growing up and all. Anyway, so it's pretty funny. But and so now I got completely we're talking about happiness. I want people to define what that means for them, because your mom and dad, they come from a different era too, where you go to work, you don't have to love your job. You want to work for good people, you want to do a good thing, but you show up at 8, you leave at 5, you make a certain amount of money. If you want to and you do a good job and you're politically aligned, and then you can move up in the company and you make a little more money and you have a little more power and you have a little more freedom. It was all about trading your time for finances that you use to support your family, right? And so I'm not saying that's bad, but that may not be you. That may not be what makes you happy, And so we're more in an era today where we have an opportunity to be individualistic in how we create our income. And so people that are still kind of following the old blueprint that they were given by their mom and dad often feel this dissonance. I'm not happy. I'm doing okay, but I'm not happy. Well, let's talk about what makes you happy. When's the last time you were really happy, right? And they may find out how helping young kids learn how to read, or teaching youth how to ride horses, or I like working with animals, right? Or hey, I may like programming. I may like sitting in front of a computer by myself and writing Python code, and being independent, and being able to submit that, and having freedom in how I manage my day and when I work and where I work, and spending more time with my kids, or whatever it might be. You have to decide what that is, though. And then you have to find the way to pursue that, because that is what makes you happy. You can meet financial milestones. You can financially do well. But if you don't feel good in your soul, if you don't feel good about what you're doing, then you really can't be happy, in my opinion. And so
I love what Jim Carrey said. I said this in another episode. He said, I think everyone should be rich and famous so that they could see that's not what life's all about.
Oh, exactly. And there are so many examples of people that have financial, materialistic things and that are still looking for themselves, trying to, and you find those people often too are still externally asking for validation. Look at what I've got. I'm a good person. Tell me I'm a good person. Look at how good I look. Tell me I'm a good person. Tell me I'm a good person. Look at what I drive. Tell me I'm a good person. Tell me I'm a good person. Tell me that you like me. And it's because we are, I don't know why in our society, it's probably a whole different episode to talk about the cues that we get that tell us that as we check these boxes, people are going to go, oh, finally, you've made it now. You're one of us. Come on in. We love you. We're going to be, even when we talk about spirituality, sometimes we look to Christianity or whatever our religions might be as a way of being accepted, as a way of being, these people are going to really love me and care for me.
Oh, I
and
see.
What you find is there's the same challenge. Just because we're Christians, and just because they're Christians, that doesn't mean that there's necessarily authenticity there when they talk about, well, we love you, brother. Okay, well, I'm going through this hard time, or I need to talk to you about something. Well, I don't have time to do that. I mean, I love you, but I love you from afar, right? I get my $10 a week, and hopefully go talk to the preacher.
Well, people are limited, are limited in their capacity for everything. Being a human, I had a college psychology professor who was also my theology professor. I kid you not, his name is Dr. Robert Holier, the theology professor. He actually came to our wedding. Great guy. Miss him. He's off being some big time consultant somewhere. But he said, imagine your most favorite thing to do, such as playing baseball. Can you imagine playing it every minute of every day for the next 80 years? No, because you have a limited capacity to do that. When it comes to people, hey, I love your brother, sister, thinking of you, praying for you. Well, that's great, but they have a limited capacity to care for you. That's why we should not connect temporary things or connect happiness to temporary things. Right. When you connect happiness to the temporary, when the temporary goes away, so will your happiness go along with it. And if you connect happiness with a car, when the car's gone, your happiness is. When you connect it to money or house or status or fame or fortune or someone texting you back or replying back on social media, when those things don't happen, then your happiness goes away with it. And I just think that happiness should be made of sterner stuff.
I completely agree. I think when you decide to love yourself and forgive yourself, and accept yourself and all your flawed, your less majestic form, right? When you understand that you're a human being and you give yourself credit for trying to be better than you were the day before, then you'll be making progress towards really being happy, really being content.
Would you say that the key ingredients of that, and I think you brought it up earlier, loving yourself, because it kind of begs the question, okay, love yourself, but you can go too far with that, or that just sounds narcissistic or selfish. Would you think, and you don't have to agree, would you think that would include doing things which serve your life and not doing things that don't serve your life? I can think of drugs and alcohol and smoking and all that. Well, that just doesn't serve your life. Breaking the law may not serve your life.
Yeah, a lot of that I think is avoiding dealing with, who you are.
Yeah.
And I think, because we as human beings, we tend to see our flaws more so than our positives. And we're raised, I think, at least certain generations of us were raised. I think we're maybe seeing less of it with some of the younger generations. But we're raised to think if we think too highly of ourselves, we're being arrogant, What I'm not speaking in that term. I'm speaking at like bone deep. This is who you are. This is what you got, buddy. You better get on and ride it the best you can and make the most of it. Get better. Here's where I'm doing well. Here's where I'm not. Here are the things I do well. Here's where my strengths are. I'm going to build on that. We were talking about the science of happiness, and it's a deep subject, but from the perspective of where I'm at, and from the background of human needs, right? There's 6 human needs. The first 4 are fairly standard. We need certainty, we need some variety or uncertainty, we need some significance, we need love and connection, right? Those are the 4 that are sort of the basic. As we get a little more mature, we have spiritual needs, right? And those spiritual needs are for growth and then contribution. So when we get to a point in our life we're wondering what else we can do, what's missing. You think about growing as a person. And that means stepping outside of your comfort zone a little bit. And the other thing is contributing. How are you giving back? How are you doing more for the world? How are you being productive as a member of society? And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like you're changing the world. It means that you're calling somebody that had an influence on you when you were growing up in high school and telling them that you remember those things they did for you, and that you think of that fondly, and you probably never said how much you appreciated it. But I wanted to let you know that you really made a difference in my life. Taking a second to let other people know about their value and what they've done for you and how much they've meant to you, or something you admire about them, something you respect. It can be that simple, that outreach. If you make that something you do on a regular basis, that you'll see it'll make you feel a lot better. I'll tell you that there's a sort of a process to simplify it, and you can call it the happiness thermal if you want to. If you're familiar with like gliders, planes, they'll go out and if they catch it, so they start out at a certain altitude, and if they're lucky enough to catch a thermal, they can circle that thermal and climb it to new heights, right? Get higher and higher. And so the whole thing starts with gratitude. If you find those things in your life that you're grateful for, and you write it down, you think about it, you do this once a week, and you don't have to do every single thing that you're grateful for every day of every week. But let's say on a Sunday afternoon, or let's say, on Monday morning before you start your week, you write down 2 or 3 things you're grateful for. And so what happens is as we're grateful, we generate these, serotonin and oxytocin. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
sorry. And there's a serotonin and there's, what's the third one? I've got it written down somewhere. Dopamine. Sorry. Usually I remember that. But those 3 things that really make us feel great, right? So we start the day off that way. As we feel more content, that leads to improved sleep. The more grateful we feel, the better we sleep. And the better we sleep, that leads to a reduction in pain. These are things that are proven, right? These are things that we know.
And by the way, listeners, to put a finer edge on what Dan is talking about there is, you can choose to go get drugs, prescription drugs, street drugs, whatever, and you can create that from a bottom-up process, from a biological foundation. But what Dan's talking about is a top-down process, where through the expression of gratitude and helping, you create a cascade. And Dan, I've never heard that. I love your analogy of the thermal of happiness.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it just kind of lifts you up into the heavens.
That's right. And so each one of these steps builds on each other. So you start to practice gratitude and you sleep better. As you sleep better, that reduces pain. As your pain is reduced, that improves your mood. As your mood improves, that improves your ability to plan and make decisions. As you are able to plan and focus and make decisions, actually, and plan and make decisions, all the same thing, decision making. As you get that sense of control over what you're doing, you feel less anxiety and less stress. And as you feel less anxiety and less stress, you have more enjoyment, right? And when you have more enjoyment, you find things to be grateful for. And so you just restart the whole process. But it's just a way of, the foundation of it is just feeling grateful, having gratitude for where you are. And it reminds me, I was talking about my boys, when they were young, they would say, "Daddy, are we rich? Are we rich? Or I wish we were rich." And I would say, "Well, son, we're rich. What do you mean by rich? We have each other. We have your mom. We have this house that we live in. We just had steaks last night. We have a car. We have a park. We've got a dog. We've got, Grandy and Papa. We've got friends. We got family. We don't want for anything, son. I feel like we're blessed beyond measure." So it depends on how you define rich. If you define rich based on the model and the year of the car somebody drives or how much money they got in the bank, that's the way you want to define rich. That's okay. That's financially being at a certain level. But I like thinking about rich as, man, I'm rich in love. I'm rich in appreciation. I'm rich in family. I'm rich in all of these things that we do and we build our life together around. So yeah, I feel like we're rich. I feel like we're filthy rich,
Because if the only riches you have, guys, are riches that can be taken or destroyed by fire, moth, rust, or thieves, you're not rich.
No, you're a caretaker.
That's right.
You're
just taking care of who that stuff's going to belong to after you're no longer here.
That's right. You're renting it, right? You're using it, and you'll either use it up or someone else will get it when you're gone. But and these are concepts. The thing about working with people to make them feel better is, and what I try to do, Doc, I'm sure you do the same thing. Before we even get into what's bothering them, what they want to change, and some ways that we can take some small steps and start to make change, is just reminding people, how wonderful you are, how blessed you are, how, there's so much to be thankful for and to be grateful for in your life. And, whatever's going on that's taking you off your path, I'm trying to solidify this thought process I've had for the last several years about a divine ideal, right? If you were to fulfill your destiny on this earth as a creation of your Creator, as a child of your Creator, if you were to fulfill every aspect of your life and be the best you could possibly be at that, what would that look like? What kind of father would you be? What kind of son? What kind of husband? What kind of colleague would you be? And really, you have to put that in a, think about what would that feel like? What would that look like? What would you hear? What would you smell? What would you taste? What would the conversations be? What would the people that you hung around with be like? Would they be the same people you're hanging out with today? In many cases, I would say no, right? But when you have that divine ideal, and we're not ever going to be perfect, but when you reach your highest intent, when you have that in your mind, and you have things happen in your life, and you've got to make decisions, and you got to take steps, and you got to, when you have that as your goal, as your ideal, then I think it will help guide you and put you on the path towards living your best life. And I'm trying to really get that together so I can write it down.
I think that you did a fine job there. That's fantastic. And I hope you guys that listen today will go back and rewind and write this down for yourself. Take a hint from my buddy Joe Maniaci, put it on a recipe card, make it your recipe for the new year, put it on your visor, and then read it to yourself. Stick it in your pocket, pull it out 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 times a day, and read that back to yourself. A couple more questions, and we've got to let Dan go. But Dan, what would you say is your favorite secret change hack? One of the best ways to get started changing your life.
T-ballers, time to quit your lollygagging. Get out of the dugout, onto the field, and live the art life.
One of my favorites. You're gonna laugh at this, but and the reason I'm going to tell you this is because, and one of the things you alluded to earlier when we talk about you can teach yourself anything, and what happens, how we instill a habit. It's the reason it's so easy is because our brain is driven to efficiency. And so as we do something over and over again, it becomes embedded in our decision-making process. And that is not just the brain. The brain and the body are intertwined really tightly. You'd be amazed. There's been so many, and you probably wouldn't be, Doc, you probably know all this, but, there's been so many studies done. Sometimes when you throw something at someone, the body is reacting before the brain even recognizes that there's something coming. It's just the visual, the stimuli in the brain, before the brain even reacts, the body's already moving to catch the object.
Well, it's called an IMP, IM.P. Implicit processing. And a saying we have in the art lab is we first engineer our thoughts, and our thoughts engineer our lives. And Dan is right. The brain is its intent is to maximize effectiveness and to reduce workload. And so if you want to sit around and catastrophize all day, your brain's going to get really, really good at that, and you'll be a master catastrophizer. On the other hand, if you want to practice what we put up in a lot of our social media feed, which are TFGs, targets for gratefulness, TFGs, then, and I wish you guys could have seen Dan on camera earlier, he was doing a whole upward spiral thing with his hand, and I could just picture that rising airplane rising into the air, and you're that vehicle, but you're not going to get there with these distorted thoughts, these self-sabotaging thoughts, these thoughts that create disgust for yourself. But it's to maximize efficiency.
So here's the hack I wanted to share, okay? And I challenge you guys, try this 5 days in a row, maybe try it 5 Monday mornings in a row. But before you get on a call, before you're going to go in front of a customer, before you're going to do anything that's important where you want to be your best, I want you to do this Superman pose or the Wonder Woman pose. You call it the hero pose, call it whatever you want to. But I want you to stand up, and I want you to put let me see if I can get in the camera frame correctly. Stand up, put your shoulders back, and look up like you're Superman.
Oh, that's awesome. I can see George Reeve right now. That's right. The best Superman ever, George Reeve. You guys can Google that.
Do that for 2 minutes. And when you're doing that, think about breathing in, feeling powerful, feeling, look, I just feel really on top of it. I feel really smart today. I want you to do that for 2 minutes. And I promise you'll see a dramatic effect. It just loads your body with positive endorphins and the chemicals that put us on top of our game. You'll see a real difference. And it's a game changer. While you're doing that, try to breathe. Breathe deeply in through your diaphragm. Breathe out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. 2 minutes. Do that for 2 minutes. That's my favorite hack.
That's
and it
awesome.
Really does make a difference.
In just 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It's worth a try, guys. Hey, I think I'll do that myself. I'm going to try to not let my wife catch me doing it, though. I may shut the bathroom door. And but that's such a great idea, because that imprints that image of yourself on your brain. Dan, thank you so much for being here. We've talked about whose life is it anyway, taking charge of your life, realigning, refocusing, reframing. Why is change so hard, and how can change be so easy? Find something healthy to do and repeat it. We've talked about the big secrets to less stress, more happiness, the scientific case for happiness, and we just barely scratched the surface. But we'll get more into that in future episodes, I'm sure, and have Dan back sometime. But you can hear more from Dan and get a free character strength survey at 5forges, that's FORGES.pro.viasurvey.org. That's 5forges, FORGES.pro.viasurvey.org. You can also get a free 30-minute call with Dan by going to his Calendly, just calendly.com/Dan-GTGL. Did I get that right? GTGL?
Right.
Calendly.com/Dan-GTGL. And that stands for what?
It's Guide to the Good Life.
Oh, that's awesome.
GTG.
Guide to the Good Life. And sales professionals interested in becoming other-oriented or other-centered, you can go get the book, Unreceptive, A Better Way to Sell, Lead, and Influence, written by CEO and co-founder of Aslan Training and Development at www.unreceptivebook.com. That's www.unreceptivebook.com. And one more thing before we let Dan go, we always spring this on our guests, and I'm going to go underneath the deep, dark recesses of the therapy couch. We've planted down there that I'm going to dig out a question especially crafted for Dan, and he has no idea what it is, and I'm going to read it to him.
We journey now with Doc Heath as he submerges with our special guest into the depths beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch.
Okay, guys. All right, here we go. All right. Let me Here I'm way over here in the corner. If you're watching on the A.R.T cam, that's accurate, realistic thinking, the A.R.T cam. And here's Dan's question. Okay, if you could think back over all of history, someone in history, dead or alive, who could greatly benefit from what you have to teach, who would that be, and how could they benefit?
Well, that's interesting. That is such a deep question, and I'm struggling with the same things we talk about people struggling with, where I'm not good enough to say I could have stepped in and made a difference, right? I'm a musician, and so when I think back on some musicians that have struggled in their lives that really, felt like they weren't very good and they turned to addiction, and yet they were so talented and so brilliant, I think about Johnny Cash. I wish I had had a chance to work with Johnny Cash, because I know from what I know of his background and what I've learned about his life, and I know from all the people I could have chosen, that's like not a great philosopher or anything like that, but that's somebody that comes to mind for me, that he was such a talented, such a great person, and yet he continuously he just could not believe in himself, and he fell prey to addiction and self-destructive behavior. And I really feel like I could have made a difference if I could have worked with him.
Johnny Cash. Who is that? Is he a rap star? Who is that, Johnny Cash? No, I'm just joking. I actually said that in fun to a guy one time, a CEO. I was consulting for the company, and I said, Johnny Cash, who is Johnny Cash? He said, you're fired. Johnny Cash is you're fired. Dan, it has been such a lot of fun. Mine would be, I don't typically answer these questions after a guest does, but mine would be Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, who the famous Roman philosopher king, but Commodus didn't turn out very well. And I always kind of wondered, what maybe that I know that I could say to him to kind of build on the stuff his dad taught that might have made a difference in his life. But Commodus didn't. Commodus, as an apple, he fell really, really far from the tree.
Right.
You might remember him from Gladiator, Russell Crowe's Gladiator. That's not very historically accurate. He didn't kill. Marcus wasn't killed by his son. Marcus had some type of actual plague or disease or something. He spent most of his life away from Rome and died young. He was in his 50s when he died. But he said, I'm ready to go, and he served Rome well. But his son didn't follow in his footsteps. But I always wondered, could I have used some cognitive psychology with him and maybe help change his life? Dan, thank you for being here. You T-Ballers, thanks for being here. Catch us on the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab. Have a great one, guys. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Doc. Thanks, everybody.
Guest analyst Dr. Jung A.R.T. reporting for Art Lab's psychomological couch duty for Dr. Freudnot. On sabbatical, being psycho-vacationalized. Dan Howington's PMS performance places him in the 97th percentile on the PMS's PRS, Passion Realignment Scale. This indicates a perspicaciously promising degree of positivity in our man Dan's cortical crevices, and a judicious juxtaposition towards sagacious success. Overall, life realignment specialist Dan Howington's PMS, psychosilly-metric assessment results, present a picture of an individual ingenuously ingrained with the intrinsic inculcations of neuronal modulation and who nimbly nudges others in an expert exploration of effectuation. This skillful soul likely has a prosperous prognosis of providential propitiousness in the near future until the proprietarily profitable features of his psyche have been psychobiologically analyzed and exorcised. It is my considered conclusion that Mr. Dan Howington be prescribed no less than a 317 milligram IS intrasuccessular dose of positivamide and a 2300 milligram IL intralinguistic dose of PRN mindset-statin to curtail any coachimosis-related cognitions. Dr. Jung A.R.T. guest Shrinkstigator, Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to TherapyBites shop.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers, thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the TBAL Team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
As of 3 years ago, more than 6 million Americans were living with Alzheimer's disease. Younger people get Alzheimer's disease too, but it's far less common. The number of people living with the disease doubles every 5 years beyond the age of 65. This number is projected to triple to 14 million people by 2060. By 2040, these costs are projected to jump to between $379 billion to more than $500 billion annually. And dementia, well, that's a whole other story, because the statistics are even worse, as dementia is an umbrella term for so many other neurological pathologies such as Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, Lewy body disease, frontal temporal lobe dementia, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Join us today as we enter the maze of rabbit holes and creaky neurons, discussing the psychology of dementia with our own senior care expert, Jenny Kenderes. Coming up next.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking, thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke anti-free speech mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the TBAL team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.